So let's take a look at a couple of incarnations of Tyranids that have been winning grand tournaments with the new codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about the forces of the hive mind, and we're going to be taking a look as to what people have been making with the new Tyranids codex. There were rather a lot of tournaments the previous weekend, and an enormous amount of people playing Tyranids, so it's really quite a good chance to see what people are making of the new codex, and what's likely to appear in a lot of competitive lists. With that in mind, we've got 4 different lists to look at today, 2 that won a grand tournament, and lists that came second and third runner-up at the Dallas Open GT. Those ones kind of equally important, I think, seeing as that was a massive event with over 150 people. Always interesting to see how the lists have similarities and differences, so let's jump straight into it and take a look. The first of our 4 lists was run by Innes Wilson to take first at the Clash of Alba GT, and it's a Leviathan list that unsurprisingly goes very heavy on the Synapse creatures. Leviathan's certainly one of the strongest contenders for top hive fleets, and is particularly good at defending big Synapse creatures as it gives them transhuman physiology, with wound rolls failing on rolls of a 1 to 3. The other half of their traits, a damage reroll power that you can swap out for feed or hunt biomorphologies, and the other really good thing about Leviathan is the Hive Nexus psychic power, which can allow a unit to use a different synaptic link each turn. It means that you can keep up that 4+ invul from the Zoanthropes for longer, or have multiple turns of the Maleceptor going into absolute rage mode. The list is organised into 2 different Leviathan patrols, so you can have 2 Hive Tyrants, one with wings and one on foot. That does seem to be quite a common theme that a lot of the lists have gone for. One of the standout features of just about every single list is a Neurothrope with the Synaptic Tendrils Warlord trait. That allows it to buff the psychic of 2 different units and have them casting on 3d6 drop the lowest when they use their psychic powers. It's really good combined with a Maleceptor, but any Tyranid cycle would really like it, so it's quite helpful if the Neurothrope can take advantage of it too. Then we've got the 2 Hive Tyrants, one with wings and a bone sword and adrenal glands, which seems to be the standard setup. The bone sword's basically always replaced with the Reaper Obliterax, the one that allows you to deal a mortal wound each time you wound the enemy, as well as ignore certain ignores damage mechanics, things like feel no pain type saves. When he's striking with a good number of attacks with a damage 3 weapon, it's pretty much guaranteed to leave a mark on anything. The Winged Hive Tyrant's also very good at hitting something then getting away. You can either use a stratagem to have it go back into Deep Strike Reserve, or Overrun combined with its enormous movement to get out of the way of most of the enemy's heavy hitters. Otherwise, you'll see in just about every list the vast majority of the Tyranid psychic powers on show. They've got Catalyst for the 5+ Feel No Pain, Onslaught for advancing and charging, Paroxysm to ignore Overwatch and for a big melee debuff, and then Neuroparasite and Psychic Scream, both of which can potentially deal a few more mortal wounds. Finally, it's got Hive Predator, which I think is meant to be taking Adaptive Biology, which is the 5+ Feel No Pain type save, a pretty powerful extra durability boost if it does get exposed. Then walking alongside we have the tougher Hive Tyrant with a Bone Sword and Venom Cannon, a bit of an all-rounder this guy. He can certainly lay down some damage for fire with the heavy Venom Cannon, and it's also got Adrenal Glands for a bit faster movement, and both Adrenal Glands and Toxin Sacs will also amp up his melee. He takes Catalyst and Psychic Scream, and he has the Maw Claws of Thyrax relic, an extra attack and reroll wounds in melee. Both the Hive Tyrants will certainly love the big unit of Tyrant Guard, which has been toned down a little bit in the balanced data slate, but they still give Lookout Sir protection to these enormous monsters, often meaning that you're not going to be able to deal with them in any meaningful way till you get close. Finally, for characters, in the elite section we have Death Leaper. He's basically an ultimate utility piece, has easily enough threat and attacks to beat up an elite infantry unit, but perhaps is most threatening for its objective things it can do, as the Alien Cunning Warlord trait gives it objectives secured, counting as 5 models on objectives, and it could even theoretically help out to do actions if that was important. Fairly terrifying to have that just coming bounding out of nowhere, kill a unit, and then hopefully steal an objective as well. Then the infantry units, there's a unit of 10 gargoyles. They've got a pretty fast moving objective secured, a little bit of flesh borer fire, and they can potentially be redeployed by Encircle the Prey to jump to the enemy backfield and annoy objectives or do actions. There's then 2 units of 3 Tyranid warriors with Bone Swords and Death Spitters. One unit is taking Flesh Hooks. Dual Bone Swords and Death Spitters does seem to be the pattern for the majority of the warrior units, and they're extra tough in High Fleet Leviathan as well, seeing as you can't wound them on anything better than a 4+. To guard the Tyrants, there's that big meaty and tough unit of Tyrant Guard. They all take Adrenal Glands. There's a unit of 3 Zoanthropes with Psychic Scream, They can deal out a fair amount of mortal wounds, but one of their nicest things is their Synaptic Imperative, giving basically an army-wide 4+ invul for a turn. And then to round up the list, there's 5 different monsters. The Psychic Nuke that is the Maleceptor. Unsurprisingly, one was in every single one of these top Tyranid lists this week. This one really seems to be doubling down on the Witchfires with as much mortal wound output as possible, taking Neuroparasite and Psychic Scream. Then if you want to go for absolutely max mortal wound potential, then use the Neurothropes cast on 3d6 drop the lowest, and potentially even be in the Synaptic Imperative that allows you to do the Psychic action at the same time as the rest of the Psychic tests, potentially averaging something like 15 mortal wounds out of a single caster within 12 inches. Then we've got a couple of Carnifexes, just generally strong frontline units. Each of them take heavy venom cannons and crushing claws and have enhanced senses, so are pretty threatening gun turrets at range with a fair bit of anti-tank, but you don't really want to get too close to them either. And then in another very common pick for Tyranids, there's 2 Harpies with the venom cannons, perhaps one of the other most obviously undercosted datasheets in the entire codex. I've already done an entire video on them, but with a crazy amount of anti-tank fire, a bit of anti-infantry, and adding melee and bombs on top of that, they're just pretty insane for what they do for 170 points. These both have adaptive physiologies as well, dermic symbiosis on one for the 4+ invul, and synaptic insight on the other for the transhuman, which will make it also able to be used to broadcast synaptic imperatives. Overall, looks like a truly brutal Leviathan list, pretty hefty anti-tank firepower with 7 heavy venom cannons on the field, a Maleceptor and a psychic phase from the Neurothrope and Zonethropes that will tear apart most things that are on the front line, and a bunch of useful units running around for objectives and things, between the Death Leaper, Warrior and Gargoyles. A very scary Tyranid list, and it's perhaps not too surprising that it tops a tournament in the hands of a very good player. Moving on to our second list, I'm kind of glad that it's not just the Hive Fleet Leviathan in representation. People have also been making very good use of Hive Fleet Kraken as well. This list was run by Matt Evans, who used it to take first at the Battleshock GT, and it's comprised of a single Hive Fleet Kraken battalion. Kraken's Hive Fleet adaptation amps up melee a little bit. It makes your attacks better by AP -1 on the turn that you charge, and then you can either have bonuses to your advance roll, or potentially swap that out for something like a +1 to charge. As well as that, their Psychic Power Synaptic Lure can also make charge rolls a bit more reliable. They allow you to all re-roll charge rolls against one specific target. And Opportunistic Advance, their stratagem is kind of good as well. It allows you to do a massive great big 8-inch advance move. You could do something like move the big brick of warriors really quickly up the table and force the opponent to have to deal with it. Depending on the target, you could even be getting first turn charges potentially, if you manage to combine it with the Onslaught Psychic Power. In any case, in the HQ section there's a fairly similar Neurothrope and Hive Tyrant with wings to the last setup. Perhaps the main difference here is that the Neurothrope has taken the Resonance Barb, this time for a +1 to cast and knowing an extra power. This is the only one without 2 Hive Tyrants in, as it's only a single Kraken battalion. Instead of a second Hive Tyrant, we've got a Tyranid Prime though. This one's armed with Scything Talons and a Venom Cannon. This would allow you to get the exploding 6s in melee Synaptic Imperative, so yet another buff to go along with the extra AP that you have. The Prime's also got the Direct Guidance buff that allows you to buff one unit within link range for +1 to hit. As he can also give you reroll 1s to wounds just from his native datasheet, it means that he's absolutely excellent for getting the most out of those warriors, providing 3 different buffs to them, potentially meaning that they have really quite good shooting and combat. Otherwise, Death Leaper makes another appearance, and this time there's also the Parasite and Mortrex included. He's looking like a truly nasty Ripper spawning utility piece. He's taken Alien Cunning for objectives secured and counting as 5 models, which accompanied with a 16-inch move characteristic is pretty crazy, and the Gestation Sac allows him to double down on spawning Rippers. Sacrificing the shooting that he doesn't have, he can do an action to throw out D3+1 Ripper Swarms. Really quite nice just to be able to throw down some chaff a long way away from the rest of the army. I guess if he manages to infect some models along the way, so much the better. Then in troops and infantry, we've got that big brick of 9 warriors, dual bone swords, death spitters, and adrenal glands for +1 strength, so they'll be striking at strength 8 with 4 attacks each, which is pretty crazy. They also have flesh hooks, and one of them takes a lash whip in each unit as well. I believe that's to allow the leadership debuff stratagem in times that it's going to be relevant. There's then 2 other follow-up bricks of warriors, again with death spitter, dual bone swords, and adrenal glands. Pretty scary to think that with the stratagem and onslaught, you could easily be charging something like 22 inches in a single turn, if not more. And then some other fairly chunky supporting bugs. 2 units of 3 Pyrovores, who've got really quite decent damage and defense for their 30-point cost now, and a unit of Venomthropes to give you all -1 to hit as you're moving up the table. Finally, monsters wise, again there's a Maleceptor, this one taking Neuroparasite and Paroxysm this time. Again, that'll be a massive mortal wound bomb along with the Neurothrope. Just the one Harpy this time, this one taking Dermic Symbiosis for the 4+ Invul. And then a Tyrannocyte Transport with Death Spitters and Synaptic Enhancement. I'm not 100% sure what the aim is for that to deliver. I guess it could deliver both units of the Pyrovores for a massive Burning Alpha Strike if you wanted, though you could also put a Warrior Squad in there. In any case, really quite cool to see that Hive Fleet Kraken also seems to be a competitive one as well as Leviathan. I guess decent extra movement and melee can be pretty handy if you are using some slow moving units like Warriors that are quite powerful. Finally, I thought we'd take a look at the second and third lists from the Dallas Open. This was the really big event with over 150 players, so competition was certainly very stiff. First up, we've got another Kraken list, this one run by John Lennon, and this time organised into a battalion and a patrol detachment for the extra Hive Tyrants. A lot of the choices are kind of similar to the list we've already looked at. The Neurothrope's got a very similar setup. The Hive Tyrant's kind of the same as well, it just takes the one step ahead Warlord traits for a bit of command point farming. And the Walking Hive Tyrant, I guess, is set up a bit differently. It's taking 2 heavy venom cannons rather than a heavy venom cannon and monstrous bone sword. It seems like this one's an unintended misprint in the codex, and I strongly suspect that you won't be able to take 2 of them after their FAQ drops, but at the moment it's fully legal, means that you've got a massive great big Hive Tyrant gun turret there, and it combines very nicely with Pathogenesis, the relic that allows you to reroll 1 hit and wound roll for yet more shooting damage. This guy could easily be averaging something like 12 or 16 wounds on toughness 7 or 8 vehicles when he shoots. Then the warriors are out in force again, 3 units of 3 with the bone swords and the death spitters. 1 on each unit takes a venom cannon as well for extra range punching power. A unit of 10 gargoyles and their fast moving Auspex and redeploy shenanigans, and this time no less than 3 units of 3 pyrovores. Kind of slow moving, but they can certainly lay waste to enemy infantry even if only one of them gets in range. There's a trio of Venithropes for the -1 to hit on units as they move up, and perhaps one of the most interesting things about the list is 2 big units of 5 Raveners armed with Death Spitters and Rending Claws. Kind of basically warriors with a 12-inch movement. These guys again could work incredibly well with the Kraken 8-inch advance and onslaught, giving them a 20-inch movement then a charge, and they can even fire off their Death Spitters at full accuracy before they go in. Each one of those units will be hitting with 25 attacks at strength 6 and AP -4 even before any other buffs, so it'll be quite capable of tearing up most infantry. To shield the Hive Tyrants, again there's a unit of 4 Tyrant Guard. These guys take Toxin Sacks. And then this list is the only one that eschews Harpies completely, instead choosing to double down on the Maleceptors, one with Neuroparasite and the Horror, and the other one with Catalyst and Psychic Scream. I feel with the Maleceptors, even though it might look a bit bad on paper to double down on them, I think the reality is against a lot of lists one of them is just going to get killed, and then you can just move your buffing potential with the Neurothrope to the other one, and still have one that's maximally dangerous. Overall though, it looks like a really good fun list to play. The fast moving Raveners in particular look pretty terrifying, and I feel like those Pyrovores would also be good fun to use, just as they're so cheap, expendable, and do a lot of work. Finally, last in our Tyranid Army Odyssey, we have a Leviathan list by Stephen Crawley, who used it to take second at the same tournament. I think by now we've started to establish the best things that Tyranid lists will often take, though there's still a few interesting and different things here. The Neurothrope and the Winged Hive Tyrant both are fairly typical. The Foot Hive Tyrant is taking a regular Venom Cannon and the regular Bone Sword, not doubling up on guns. Instead, he chooses to take the Shard Gullet Relic Heavy Venom Cannon. That's the one that puts it up to a ludicrous Strength 12, AP -5, and Damage 5. Certainly not one that you want to get in the way of there. There's a Tyranid Prime in addition to the cast of characters, taking Adrenal Glands, Bone Sword, and a Venom Cannon. It seems that Primes are really quite popular whenever you have a large amount of warriors in the list, just because of multiple different buffs to a unit that can act in multiple phases. Troops-wise, there's 10 Gargoyles, another very hefty contingent of warriors, a unit of 9 and a unit of 6, both of which take Death Spitters and Bone Swords and as many Venom Cannons as they can pack in. Again, the Venom Thropes make an appearance with their -1 to hit. The Tyrant Guard are only 3 of them this time, but still should do the job at shielding those Hive Tyrants. Just the one Maleceptor, and again this one takes the pair of Harpies that I'm sure is going to be a staple. Again, one with Synaptic Enhancement and one with Dermic Symbiosis. And I think over the course of these, it does show the things that are most popular within the Codex. Neurothropes, Harpies, Warriors, and Maleceptors all seem to be absolute staples, with a bunch of other things being very common pickups as well. So let me know your thoughts on all this Tyranid goodness then down in the comments below. It does look like Tyranids might be one of the main factions to beat, at least in the short term, but at least they don't appear to be absolutely crushing everyone quite to the same extent as some of the armies that Games Workshop has released in the previous few codexes. If you've enjoyed the video, I will certainly try and keep the regular 40k stuff coming. I do tend to post new things just about every day, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which is how I can afford to keep on making videos like this quite so regularly. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.